okay.
It's left one.
I might have messed it up, sorry. I'll get Father's.
No. Just go. Just start.
Okay. Test. Okay. Okay, guys, sorry about that. Let's begin in prayer. Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, thank you for being with us here today. We know that you dwell with us. We know that you love us in the Blessed Sacrament. Tell us what we need to know. Bring us to your heart. Help us to speak prophecy. Help us to speak truth, but always to do so in charity, in love. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Father, Son. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. Very much appreciate the time. And again, feel free to help yourself to some Publix and Dunkin', that great combo. And thanks for everyone, although I wish I could throw it through cyberspace. Can't bring food to you guys, but thank you for our online community for being here. Again, they'll be here during my talk, but then during the Q&A, they will not be here. The live stream will be cut. The recording will be cut. So that gives you guys more freedom of expression. So, yeah. Great. And so, also, yeah, I don't think this is a problem, but this talk's a little bit spicy, if you will. So it's going to be not for children, so teenagers and above, but I see it's not a problem here. Okay. Awesome. So on Tuesday, we talked more about atheism and agnosticism, okay? So those were kind of unnecessarily long terms, kind of Greco-Roman terms that are basically denoting someone who says, okay, I'm not sure if there's a God, and someone who says, I'm pretty sure, or I think, that there is no God. And I thought I should, but yeah, please look up more arguments on both sides, because it was just a 45-minute lecture. But I was trying to show that those two positions, while maybe at first hand weighty, especially emotionally, for us human beings who live after the fall, they don't logically and rationally hold the most water, right? They're not like completely illogical in the sense of, it's not like someone who holds them is holding to 2 + 2 = 5, right? But what makes the most sense, it's theism at the end of the day. Okay, great. So went on to there. Now, part of our Catholic faith is also, and it's pretty much a mostly in-house event, but I'll be going about, and you'll see today, I'll be going about this topic that we'll talk about today, really by, as much as I can, finding common ground, but without compromise. So taking the other side's oftentimes the case, premises or pre-existing beliefs, and still showing that even with those, you would have to be, rationally speaking, for the unborn, against abortion. That's the big topic we'll talk about today. And then also against, we can call it many things, but we'll say LGBT agenda, okay? Your LGBT goals, okay? And there's many other things we could talk about related to cultural stuff. And yeah, these things, hot button issues, if you will. But again, I only have limited time, and Q&A is way more interesting for everyone. So we're trying to get that in, and we'll end promptly at 10:30. So there's a lot here, and I can only cover so much. So apologies if I don't get to something that's important. Yeah. And then another thing, just to preface it, is that this is really just the intellectual or rational side of it. I'm not going to be saying anything uncharitably or angrily or assuming things I shouldn't assume when I'm giving you guys these arguments, these reasons for why we believe what we believe. It's all done in charity, but sometimes I'll jump forward, move on to a point more quickly than I would do if I was talking to someone who was pro-abortion, pro-legal abortion, for instance. I would take my time much more, very much in a human-to-human interaction. There's things you have to say that are prudential. You can word it differently. You don't want to prudential your way out of truth, but at the same time, there's ways to do it while incorporating these arguments faithfully. So just a preface on that. Okay, and also, just because these topics are so important, and again, hot button issues, right? So I'm not assuming motives, right? I'm not assuming someone who holds positions other than I do have bad motives or something like that, right? People are oftentimes confused. It's a confusing world out there, and there's a lot of ignorance, and so I'm not assuming someone is evil because they're for, a legal abortion. They might have just only heard the best arguments on the other side. Maybe they were raised by pro-legal abortion parents and were only surrounded by those people their whole life. And the one pro-life argument they heard was the Bible says blank. And they're like, okay, well, the Bible's been disproved. I don't think that's the case, but they might think that. So they think the only good argument or the only argument they heard is inherently incorrect. Okay, so, it often is the case that people just have not heard these things. And so, it's our job to be light and leaven, refresh people's memories, or give them the truth at its best, right, on these positions. Okay. Also, I guess these issues do affect so many people close to us. And I have, very much a lot of pity upon and empathy for people who struggle with these things, I'm good on it, but it's, a painful subject, right, because it affects so many people. So, I don't downplay that. So even though today I'm coming with the arguments, just know that my heart is full of mercy on people who struggle with these, either in the heart or in the head. So, okay. Okay, that was probably the most prefaces I've done, but I probably thought it was necessary. Okay, so the first topic, we're going to start with abortion. Okay, so say that word at a fashionable cocktail party and watch quiet descend upon the land, right? Not exactly the most fun for anyone to talk about. So why is this? Well, because just like on Tuesday, how I brought out the fact that atheism versus theism is inherently a great divider, is inherently high stakes, so is this issue, okay? So if we think about it, right, so abortion would be, to the other side, right, merely the removal of a clump of cells, right? That's not how everyone understands it. It's not the best pro-legal abortion argument, but people would understand it that way, some people. And in essence, okay, let's say this is true. It's like a tonsillectomy, right? Okay, so it's just like going to the dentist. Again, not in the emotional pole. I think most pro-legal abortion people would say, it's emotionally way more difficult than that. But in essence, if it's not a human being, that's what it is, right? It's just like removing some clump of cells, something that's not working, and it's just like a normal medical procedure, right? Again, objectively, not subjectively, for anyone, even pro-legal abortion, because that is quite a taxing thing, emotionally and physically. But in essence, it is like that. if their side is correct, right? So if this is the case, then millions of Americans are saying millions of other Americans are paying doctors to, like a hitman, kill their own babies in their most vulnerable and innocent time and place. While really what's happening is they're getting a root canal, right? Again, objectively. Okay, so if this is the case, then no wonder, I don't blame them, no wonder pro-legal abortion people are so annoyed with pro-lifers, right? Imagine half the country said you were killing a live human being when you were just going to the dentist, okay? That's crazy on them, right? On pro-lifers in this case. So that's kind of like a much larger, because they're small, so they're kind of in some way pitiable, adorable. But imagine if half the country was like radical animal rights activists, right? So they're kind of cute because there's like 10 of them, right? There's more than that, but imagine if half the country thought if you killed a squirrel, if you killed a pig, that's like killing a human being. We'd be living in crazy town, right? The laws, the social expectations would change radically for saving these animals' lives if they're worth just as much as you and me, right, as human beings. So this is kind of the same thing, right? In the inverse, if you're recognizing that this big population, there's a lot of unborn babies, is not part of the human family, and if that's true, but you're treating them like they are as half the country being pro-life, then that's half the country is crazy on a big issue and in an important way, okay? So that's the stakes on this side. Now, what if the pro-life position is true, and I think it is? Okay, if the pro-life position is right, where the organism in the womb is truly human and it's deserving of equal rights, right? Then, those certainly, there would almost always be a different level of malice, right? Okay, so it's way harder to miss the humanity in a 40-year-old Jewish man, right? It's very easy to see the humanity in that person, right? As opposed to a 4-week human embryo, right? I think you can see the humanity there. You can get past appearances, but the appearances, I think, do affect people's malice in these sorts of things. But again, just objectively speaking, the amount of human beings unjustly killed in America in the womb equals the Jewish Holocaust about every 8 years. So since 2016, we've had the equivalent, again, objectively, not from motives or subjectively, but from a numbers perspective, numbers of the innocent, we've had a Jewish Holocaust since 2016 up to this day. So if the pro-life position is true, that's just as high, if not higher, of stakes, right? And urgency to, pray and to get legislation done on this issue. Okay. So now the question is, now that I set the stakes immensely high, I just built a skyscraper. And we'll have to ask the question now, because I just made a claim, I didn't prove anything. So now the question is, which position is true, okay? So a problem in this discussion is that sometimes pro-life and pro-legal abortion, pro-choice people, they talk right past each other, okay? So pro-life people say, the Bible and the Catholic Church, they speak pretty clearly that abortion is wrong, right? Many a times, not all the time, pro-legal abortion people will say, well, I don't believe that the Catholic Church is divine, it can err, even if I like it. I don't think the Bible is inerrant, so it's not a problem for me. I can just move on. Or show how maybe it's ambiguous. I don't think it is. but you can get around that. And so you can also see a pro-life person, right, saying something like, well, the embryo or fetus has a soul, so we can't allow it to die, right? So again, it's not everyone, but a good amount of pro-legal abortion people will say, well, I don't believe in a soul. It's not a scientific thing you can test. So that doesn't make a difference for me, right? So it's your belief, not mine. I can do what I want when it comes to abortion here. Okay. So again, well, I think there's good reasons to believe in the Bible and the church, the magisterium, the soul. There's not really time, and it's not really prudent to bring that up as a pro-lifer. And it's partly not prudent because I've found and done a lot of research and work on this issue of abortion. I found that the pro-life position is, in a sense, at least way easier to prove based on pre-existing premises that you can find as common ground with the pro-choice person. Okay, so it's easier to prove. So, you know, if you had to make the case for like a really hard thing in order to get this person to change their worldview, to show them the light of the truth, it might be prudent, and I think oftentimes is, to show them something that's actually pretty easy to prove, which, you know, I'm open to all arguments, all new arguments too, but this issue is actually pretty clear-cut from what I found. Things like the Bible, you might get in the weeds, you might know more. And again, I believe in it. I do think you can show its historicity, etc. But this issue is easier to show based on pre-existing suppositions. Okay, so it's often prudential just to go with this and not get sidetracked. Okay. So again, we want to see common ground when you're talking with pro-legal abortion people, but without compromise, right? We never want to compromise our beliefs. And so you can say something like, well, let's assume, if they believe this, that, you know, the world is really materialistic. There is no immaterial stuff, for lack of a better term. There is no soul. There is no God. All these things, right? Let's just assume that, right? You're not saying you do believe that. You're just meeting them where they're at, okay? This kind of non-religious worldview, which again, is not everyone who's pro-legal abortion, but it is a good amount of people, okay? So let's take this worldview, okay? I still think, even if you do it, the pro-life position is better by a country mile, okay? And, you know, if I was myself, I'm not, but if I was an atheist and a materialist, except to all those premises, you know, I would still be pro-life because it's the most rational and scientific position that I can take. And so, now we'll get to it. Let's examine why exactly, okay? So, again, starting with this assumed worldview, it's more secular, materialistic, right? There's still an understanding that if you have biological life, then you have life, right? If the organism is, we'll talk about what that means, what scientists say, but if you have biological life, you're alive, right? It sounds like kind of me saying the same thing twice, right? But again, you know, we all know life commonsensically. We'll talk about it scientifically because that's more objective. But we all know if something's alive, a couple markers you can throw out right away is like it's growing, it's living. We all can tell right away. And we'll get more into the nitty-gritty again. But if you have this, then you're living, right? And you have some, I would say, more worth. But at least there's a difference there between a corpse and a living being. Okay. Right? So pretty much everyone agrees that life is a thing that is worth protecting, right? And so if you have biological life, you have life. Okay. So again, even if you think it's not everyone, right? A lot of people who are pro-choice don't believe this, but a good amount of people do. You know, if you think a human being is just a kind of more complicated trousered ape, right? You still think they're a living ape, right? Again, with biological life. And you clearly know that this is worthy of protection because they probably don't have access, to this live stream. They're not able to be here like you guys today, or they are able to be here because they haven't killed anyone, right? So they know intrinsically that life is a good worth protecting, right? They're not going to have access to this live stream in prison, right? I don't think they would. There's better things to watch if so. But that shows that everyone watching this talk today knows that biological life is worth protecting in some way, right? So there is this, even if you take it just as the value of like another monkey or like a complicated monkey, there is this understanding of anyone who can watch this lecture today, which is, I'm not doing this to hear myself talk, right? Then there's already a series of decisions you've made in your life that, at the very least, respects biological life, right? You're not in jail for 12 counts of murder or something. So that's good. So this is principle of preservation, and one of its purposes is to not die or to be killed, right? And you've respected that in yourself, right? By being here today, and not being dead already, and also not killing anyone else, right? So, again, not making too big of a jump, but biological life as a good is inherently or tacitly accepted by anyone who can hear this lecture today. Okay, so biological life is good, at least to a little bit of a degree. Okay. So if something is living, right, there's a respect among both sides, because, many pro-legal abortion people, if they thought it was killing, they wouldn't do it, right? The vast majority. And they have access to this today, right? So we know it's a pretty big, we know what biological life is intuitively, but let's come at it more scientifically, right? Like I mentioned. Okay. So certainly, first of all, right, if we don't know what life is, we can't make judgments of if this thing has life, right? So we look to, first of all, experts in the field, right? That's a form of common ground. With the hard sciences, you can still have, to some degree, I think to a significant degree, common ground here, right? The soft sciences, like sociology, stuff like this, that gets more tricky because they're assuming more controversial premises. I'm going to get into that. But something like biology, I think everyone would agree, even people on the other side, is more objective than something like sociology, right? Even like political science, right? That makes you assume certain philosophical positions. But biologists want to see if there's life. Everyone agrees what biological life is. Okay. So there was a recent poll, according to the University of Chicago, and this took professional, PhD'd biologists from both sides, okay, pro-choice and pro-life. And what was the number that said life began at conception? That was the question. And it was 96% said life begins at conception. Okay, it was a good poll. Now, that's a scientific consensus. So that's like saying that, the Earth revolves around the sun. That's a scientific consensus. The Earth is not flat. That's a scientific consensus. Okay, there's people who believe otherwise, but their position is ostracized for good reason. There's not much evidence on it. And so we see here, that's pretty good. Okay, maybe someone is skeptical though, right? The poll might have been worded poorly or mismanaged or something like that. It wasn't, but let's be rigorous and take a look for ourselves, right? Because the argument from authority is the weakest, according to a great thinker of our church. And Yeah, let's look at it ourselves. So generally biologists agree that if you have 2 or 3 of these markers, then you have biological life. If you have 3, it's for sure. Okay. Now, 1 is a little bit, you have to make some distinctions on. So I'll backtrack in a second. But these 3 markers are metabolizing food into energy, growth by cellular reproduction, and reacting to stimuli. That was a mouthful, even for me. So I'll say it again. Metabolizing food into energy, growth by cellular reproduction, and the last one, reacting to stimuli, okay? So if you got all 3 of these, 2, you make a good case. All 3, you have it, okay. Now, the unborn, they might have all 3. The one that I think I should preface a little bit or go into a little bit is metabolizing food into energy, right? Because you receive food when you go into the womb. You start receiving, also the embryo goes to the fallopian tube and attaches in the endometrium. And that's when it starts receiving more. Maybe it is a little bit before there too, but I have to check on this a little bit more. But certainly once it latches on, so to speak, to the mother, you have that. But if you were to tell me that, that means it doesn't have life, well, that's like saying that a starving guy who's still living, breathing, his heart is beating, doesn't have life. I'm like, no, he has life. He just doesn't have any food in his body, right? And he will die soon, but he's just running on fumes, right? So in the same way, there's nothing wrong with the very young embryo or zygote there. It's just that food is coming. It's 11:59 and lunch is at noon. So I don't think that takes away life. So, and the other things are uncontroversial. When you have a zygote, a single-celled human being, it's just like rapidly multiplying. It's like, yeah, it's like the amount of words that are coming out of my mouth, right? 10 words per sentence, and it's going to come out to probably 4,000 words by the end of this. So rapidly multiplying, and it's reacting to stimuli, right? How else could it get into the womb? It's trying to go through the fallopian tube, right? That's tricky. It doesn't exactly have eyes. So it's trying to go through the movements. There's something unconsciously moving it that way, okay? So it's reacting to the stimuli in the body, and these are all physically charted events, right? Again, see how I haven't talked about the soul, I haven't talked about God. This is just a biological process. And it's pretty clear that a single-celled human zygote, conception going onwards, is part of this biological family, biological group. Okay. So it's a scientific fact, right? You can establish this with scientifically. This is what would be considered a fact, right? It's not like everyone agrees on that the earth is not flat. There's actually a good amount of people who think the earth is flat. That doesn't mean you have to say, oh, it's an opinion, it's up for debate. It's not really up for debate. It's just people believe crazy things. And so we can say this is a scientific fact, and it's a living organism, right? And it's human, right? Because if you do any DNA test, it shows human DNA in the zygote during a human pregnancy, right? And humans only beget humans, so it's going to be human. Okay. Just to cover a quick objection, right? So I'm going to do this, right? That's actually killing a bunch of pinky cells, human cells, right? And so someone can do that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it is a argument, right? So flicking those off, we don't call that 10 counts of murder, but I killed all these little human cells, right? So what's the problem with doing that with the embryo, right? And the person who's doing this, who makes this argument, is confusing parts and wholes, right? So you can lose any part of yourself or your body, right? You can lose your arm, and you're still fully you, right? If if you have a 4-letter name and you lose 75% of your body in a tragic accident, and they only start calling you, let's say, trying to think, I was going to say Bill, but then it still sounds like Bill if you take out the L. But they only pronounce your name with 3 of the letters that's in your name, right? That wouldn't make any sense. You're still 100% you as long as you have life in the whole of your organism, okay? So it doesn't matter if you lose some parts, right, that are unessential to your living biological life in a whole, as a whole. So it's a part, not a whole, okay? And it's called organic unity, okay? We even see this on the inverse, okay? So if you die, some cells will die along with you. In fact, a lot, especially over a short amount of time. But a lot of cells will be living, and I think for a good amount of time afterwards too. So if you want to say that, your life is quantitatively the amount of cells in you that are living, and just make some kind of a judgment call about when that's sufficiently human, the amount of quantitative cells, this doesn't really work, because when someone dies right away there, they might have more cells than's in a newborn baby who's clearly living, right, that are still living. And so that doesn't work, because we know that that's a corpse after someone dies. So if we just said that, it depends on how many living cells you have. If they had more cells than a living newborn, just was born yesterday, then that would very much be a contradiction. Okay, so it's not about the quantitative amount of cells you have, right? It's about your organic unity. Okay. Now, so there's this organic unity, there's this wholeness about the human embryo, right? It's scientifically alive, biologically speaking. Okay, so where does abortion come in? Because abortion is just kind of a word for people. It's kind of a symbol for human rights, and words are symbols. And it's not really known what it is, okay? So we have this living organism over here, in there, in the womb. What does abortion do? Why is it controversial, right? Because doctors will open up a woman's womb and perform prenatal surgery, right? If an unborn child has spina bifida, they'll do that. They'll affect the child in what everyone knows is a good way, right? So why am I not annoyed about that? Why am I not speaking up about that, right? It's because prenatal spina bifida surgery is good. It helps the child, right? It's back, especially. Okay, so why is abortion any different? It's the same thing, right? You're going in and doing something to the unborn child, but what is that thing? That's the question, right? And what it is, in both abortionists and pro-life activists, abortionists who became pro-life activists, but even abortionists who are still for legal abortion, will admit that abortion is swallowing a pill to suffocate or starve, using a vacuum cleaner to suck and cut into pieces, using a scissor to plunge into this human embryo, okay? So that's what abortion is, right? It's important to say it, though it's hard to, but that's what it does, right? So, again, knowing that God is merciful to people who have done this, but it's the truth. This is what's happening, right? It's not spina bifida surgery by any means. Okay. Okay, so these actions, what I described, you can get the picture, that it certainly kills this biological living being, right? That's what it's meant to do. And the doctors who do it are way smarter and more capable than the unborn child, right? It's not exactly David and Goliath. It's like baby David and the same Goliath, right? It's not enough matter for God to work a miracle there to save the child, although it does happen. There's a group of people out there, interestingly, who have survived abortion. But, okay. So all this child needs, right, is net, right? By net, I mean nutrients, the right environment, and time. Nutrients, environment, and time, and it will become an infant, a toddler, a teenager, and then a fully formed adult, right? It just needs net. That shows that it's already the same being. It just needs the right externals in order to grow and become an adult human being, right? With the full rational capacity. But again, what does abortion do? It gets rid of all these things, the environment, nutrients, and time, right? So it's already there. It's just the externals are changing over time. But intrinsically, internally, you have the same thing, which is a biological, single, whole human being. Okay. Okay, so it's distinct. And we know this also, if you just want to take even more so of the kind of materialistic perspective, you know, it's a different DNA. It will always be different from any human being across the span of time. Shows the uniqueness of any child conceived. And so, yeah, it's different from the parent's DNA, although it is informed by it. It's different from it. So even from a purely rational or purely materialistic perspective, you still have something different there. Okay. Okay. Now, you know, there are still people who would be pro-legal abortion, even with all this being said and agreed upon, for various reasons, okay? And there's kind of two main arguments that they'll make at this point, okay? So one of them is called, I don't mean it pejoratively, is focusing on something else, focusing on the circumstances, okay? And the other one is more about bodily autonomy or bodily rights, okay? So we'll focus on the first one first, and we'll take the hardest version of it, or the most difficult case, okay? And this is the case of rape, okay? And so thousands of, mostly women, in America are raped every year, okay? And probably much more unreported. So as another hard subject. And again, as I preface this talk, you're going to want to, when you're talking to people who are pro-choice, express, because I believe you genuinely do, just like me, righteous anger at rape and what it does, what it is, how terrible it is, and yeah, just how wicked. So it's not even like you don't even just force an unwanted body onto a person, but also motherhood, oftentimes, in so many deep psychological, sexual, emotional, and bodily wounds, right? And then you allow that person to be tempted to revenge, anger, living in a spirit of hatred of all men, in most cases it's women, right? And even God the Father, right? God is Father, according to Christianity. So associate men with being wicked and vicious. So it's an incredibly evil act on so many levels. And, you know, so if you're talking about this, I know you share the same conviction against it that I do. So really take the time to express that before you jump into anything about pro-life apologetics, right? Okay. But this is the best argument against making abortion illegal, right? Because as the argument goes, right, if she becomes pregnant from a rape, then making her bring that child to term, everything that goes into a pregnancy, which is a lot, is too much. She never asked for it. She never asked for a pregnancy. And there's so much that goes into a pregnancy, right? Not to mention raising the child, right? And she'll oftentimes see like the rapist's face in that child, right? It's the biological material. So, okay. Now, I would say to that, all those things I said to you guys before, right? The rapist may very well deserve the death penalty, and at least life in prison, okay? But why, why should an innocent person, again, saying it more charitably, I'm just getting to the point for sake of time here, but why should an innocent person, right, created because of this violent act, the unborn child, came about in violence, but never committed any violence, right? Why should he suffer punishment, a similar kind of violence, right, that he never did or deserved or never did anything to deserve it, okay? Someone else deserves this violence, possibly, at least life in prison, right? But not this person, right? It's someone else who did the crime. And so that's basically the argument, right? Don't let the child suffer for the sins of the father or the mother in rare circumstances. But again, we should rally around people who have suffered from this, families who have suffered from this, right? It's very important. But again, we're just focusing for the sake of time on the intellectual aspect. So I don't think there's any case that is as bad in terms of circumstances as rape, okay? So I think if you prove the hardest case, which I think I have, again, with a heavy heart, but if you do that, all the other cases of circumstances, and I have more reasons, but we don't have time, also fall flat, just intellectually, right? They don't justify legal abortion, killing a living biological human being, okay? Okay, great. So, and again, very much focus on your empathy there. Since for the sake of time, just moving on quickly to the other kind of argument. So these are called bodily autonomy claims. So there was just kind of skipping ahead to the meat of it here. There was a famous argument made in the 1970s. You probably have heard of it. It's called the violinist argument. And it basically goes like some kind of a thought experiment where, okay, let's say you go to sleep one day, you wake up the next morning, you're in a hospital bed, and you get a bunch of tubes connected to your body. You're like, whoa, what just happened? The doctor comes in, he says, oh, let me explain. Okay, I'm sorry. So this music lover society kidnapped you. This is super far-fetched. I didn't make this up. I'm just your mailman. But they kidnapped you, and they hooked you up to this machine because the world's greatest violinist, he was in need of this special tissue, this special bodily bones or tissue that only you have. You're the only donor who could do it. So they kidnapped you because they didn't think you would say yes for whatever reason. They kidnap you, and lo and behold, it did work. But you have to stay plugged into this violinist who's next to you, in the bed next to you, for 9 months. Okay, that's the only way it's going to transfer. Now, I'm sympathizing with you that this is a doctor speaking. This is really bad. They should be in prison for this music society. But because I'm pro-life, I don't think you should, and you can't, unplug yourself. Okay. Now, it's supposed to, it might be a bit different, but that's the argument in essence. It's meant to show that the pro-life position is counterintuitive, right? It goes against common sense. Although it's a good thing for you to stay plugged in to this guy, that would be a great act of heroic charity or love. It's not, at the end of the day, going to be necessary morally. And I would agree with that. Okay. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, first of all, it's a scenario of unconsensual. Again, we talked about how important that is to talk about the non-consensual cases, but we see in this case, it is non-consensual, which is not most cases, right? Again, we talked about that before, the importance of focusing on it. But I think what you see, once you get past that, there's a way to change the analogy to account for that. The problem with it is, I'll throw another analogy at you guys. This one's a little bit more simple. Let's say that a homeless man shows up on your yacht. You got a nice yacht, good for you. And you take the yacht out, and a homeless man just kind of appears there. And I guess he was sleeping on the boat. And you realize that this is not a good situation because you don't know this guy. You're on your own. It's a little bit strange, and you're uncomfortable. Okay. Now, in most scenarios in the moral life, you can do three things, right? If you see a guy on the side of the road with a flat tire, you're driving down 95, you have three options, right? You could stop and help him, and it'd be a good thing. You could keep going, and that would not be a bad thing. That would just be a neutral thing, right? It's not a good deed, but it's not a bad deed either, for various reasons. But you could also, again, no one does this, thankfully, ram your car into him as he's trying to change his tire, right? You could get rid of the person causing the problem. And it's good that no one really does this, right? Some people do, like hitmen, right? Gangsters. But most people don't do that. But in this scenario, right, with the boat, you can't not help the person. You can either help him get to shore, bring him back, or kill him, right, by not giving him food and water and just locking yourself in the boat, or pushing him off the boat, right? But at the end of the day, the only thing you can do is help him or kill him, right? It's not exactly a ton of natural resources on the boat, right? Can't find a tree and start eating the apples off of it. So you have to help or kill. And this is the same thing as abortion, right? Because if you leave the baby alone, if you help it with your body as the woman, you're going to naturally help it just by eating yourself. You're not helping, right? You're either helping, giving it nutrients, or you have to do something drastic, which is an abortion, to make it stop growing and eventually be born. Okay. All right. Yeah, okay, we're going to talk about, just going to make a judgment call here. We're already 5 minutes over with the talk portion. So I'm going to talk about the LGBT stuff on Friday if there's no kids in the church, right? It's fine if you want to bring your families, that's great, in which case I will skip over it and just recommend things on that day to take a look, at your own leisure when there's not families around, right? But just for the sake of time, I can't do it justice. And it's kind of a pedagogical thing. In other words, a teaching thing. If I get into it for a few minutes but don't explain enough, then it doesn't really help anyone. So I apologize about that. But I will talk about it on Friday if, there's no families around. Because I know it's important. I don't downplay it. Yeah. And again, on Friday, we'll also talk about religious arguments, disagreements between religions in charity, but also seeing where we disagree, because I could just list off things we agree on. It's not really, doesn't help people understand their faith, right? So, yeah, we'll talk about that too. But in the next 10 minutes here, we'll do Q&A. We'll let the live stream cut. Again, the Q&A won't be live streamed, so just give me a few seconds here while we cut the live stream. But thank you for the time. Sorry I dragged on the first part, but appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, any questions? Yes.
What it comes down to is the woman finds out she's